welcome to the program In the Know. I'm David Winstead. I'm extremely pleased to have Senator Jeff Waldstreicher with us here today from District 18 of the Maryland Senate in Annapolis. So Jeff, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know you're a neighbor. You also, given that this is Montgomery Municipal Cable, you represent 8 of the 18 municipalities in Montgomery County. So,
that's right. Yeah, my legislative district has more municipalities than any other legislative district in Montgomery County.
Yeah, well, great. We're a good group. So
there's no
we're pleased
question
we're in
about
your
that.
hands.
Yeah.
Jeff, as a starter, just tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're an attorney and practicing lawyer, but you've been in Annapolis for 17 years. How did you decide to run for the Maryland Senate, initially the House, but then the Senate? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I grew up right here in Montgomery County in Silver Spring. And so I'm a hometown boy, came back after law school and decided to get involved with some local nonprofits. And I had really no desire to be involved in elected office. I always thought I'd be kind of the guy behind the scenes, not unlike yourself and your career. Right. I always figured I'd be counsel to the Judiciary Committee or some behind the scenes role. But a vacancy came up. Some of the nonprofits I was working with urged me to run for the vacancy. I lost badly. Losing is a great lesson in how politics works. I'm so glad I did. But then there was a second vacancy 2 years later, and I took the lessons that I learned in losing that vacancy race to the next election and was able to win in the House of Delegates and now here in the Senate.
Well, that's great. Jeff, you're vice chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate, and I know that you're credited with the Gun Safety Act and with a lot of the Safe Harbor Act and the REDEEM Act. Given your leadership in judicial matters in Annapolis, can you tell us a little bit about the recent successes you've had? I know in the gun safety, obviously gun violence is a major problem, and we appreciate your leadership. But tell us a little bit about those acts that came through with your sponsorship in the Senate this year.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Well, as you know best, politics is a team sport and policy making is a team sport. So my name was on those bills, and thank you for mentioning that. But of course, my chairman, Will Smith, my president, Bill Ferguson, very much supported me throughout that process. The gun bill to which you're referring is called Senate Bill 1, and it's the Gun Safety Act of 2023. As you know, the Supreme Court in a case called Bruin basically said at its core that everyone has a Second Amendment right to self-defense, not only in their own home, but in public, and can carry arms in public unless the government specifies certain designated areas as being a place where guns are not appropriate. And in fact, Justice Thomas, in the opinion, gave a few examples of places where guns are not appropriate. Courts, that shouldn't be surprising coming from a Supreme Court justice, legislative assemblies, polling places, schools, and the like. And we took Justice Thomas's opinion as guidance to analogize other places where guns may not be appropriate, even if you have a permit. And so I was proud to lead the charge to pass SB 1 to ban guns in sensitive places here in Maryland. That'll go into effect October 1st. You know this as an attorney. The Second Amendment folks have an active litigation practice across this country. They will challenge the law in court, but I'm confident that our Attorney General, Anthony Brown, will defend it very ably. Senate Bill 1 was not the only gun safety bill we passed this year. It was actually part of a package, a 3-bill package that many folks think is the strongest package in the nation.
Right, and notably, it's the best legislative sort of success of the last decade, right?
No question about it. In fact, I was with Congressman Jamie Raskin last night, and along with former Senator Brian Frosch, they together passed the 2013 Firearm Safety Act. And here we are 10 years later, building upon that legacy.
Right, and the assault weapons ban had already been done.
That's right. That's part of the 2013 legislation.
Right. So tell me a little bit, you mentioned Supreme Court justice, but tell me a little bit about the efforts of session or discussion of sort of right to choice and some of the issues that result in the debates on that topic.
Well, as you know, of course, the right to choose, the right to abortion, the right to reproductive freedom the Supreme Court held was part of our constitutional structure for 50 years. And so it was a shock in this case called Dobbs that came down last June, for the Supreme Court to reverse that decision and throw it back to the states. As you've seen in other states, unfortunately, and actually very tragically, the right to choose has been rolled back in states like South Carolina and Texas, where abortions have essentially been banned. This is very dangerous because people will go to extra legal means in order to obtain an abortion, and that poses a health risk to them. Maryland is going in the other direction. We're expanding the right to choose, and we're putting it in our state constitution. So for all time, here in Maryland, everyone will have reproductive freedom. As you probably know, in Maryland, we can't just put something in the state constitution legislatively. It requires the assent of the voters. That's a good thing. And so this past legislative session, we put the right to choose on the ballot. So on the 2024 ballot in November of 2024, everyone here in Maryland will have the option of including the right to reproductive freedom in the Maryland state constitution. It's something I'm very proud of. And let me just give a quick shout out to my colleague, Senator Ariana Kelly, who was really the driving force behind that legislation.
In terms of the cannabis discussion in this legislative session and sort of the Cannabis Reform Act, I know there was, for the first time, a tab on a fee that could come back to municipalities. Can you explain that a little bit? I think it had never been done before, and in the context of the cannabis legislation, what happened there in terms of the commission setup and the fee that would accrue from that activity?
So I'm a strong supporter of cannabis legalization, and I've been supporting this for more than a decade. I have a libertarian take on this. You know, people are using alcohol in the privacy of their own homes. They should be able to utilize marijuana in the same way, both medically and recreationally. But we also know that making recreational cannabis legal comes with challenges in the community, and those are challenges that increase costs on municipalities, whether it's law enforcement costs or other regulatory costs. And so the idea was, if we are going to legalize this and collect taxes from this product, some of that money should go back to our municipalities for the purposes of law enforcement or for the purposes of regulatory enforcement, to ensure that the market gets set up in a way that's credible and legal and comfortable for our communities. And so that's exactly what we did. A portion of the fee will come back to the municipalities to help them deal with some of the externalities that come into communities when you legalize cannabis.
On that point, do you think, because of obviously our audience, residents in the county and municipalities, do you think that that's a precedent that might be expanded where, you know, I know the state gas tax goes to this trust fund and entitling fees, but a portion of the corporate tax comes back to the municipalities. Do you think this fee is a precedent of maybe tapping into that stream more from municipalities?
I think that it's a definite possibility.
Okay.
I mean, there's two things at work here, and they're in tension with each other. The first is philosophical. I believe, as someone who represents 8 municipalities, and the people watching this show probably believe, that government closest to the people is best. And municipalities know what's best for their citizens. And so increasing resources for municipalities is a really important thing to do, because it allows the government closest to the people to be able to provide for and serve the people that they represent. The tension with it comes in tough budget times. So with help from President Biden and the federal government, we've had relatively flush state budgets over the past few years. But I'm old enough to remember, and I know you are too, the Great Recession, where things were very tight. And oftentimes the first money to get cut is aid to local government, both county government and municipal government. So we know that there are some economic storm clouds on the horizon. And so increasing resources to our municipalities right now could be risky, because we might have to pull those resources back if we were to get into tough budget times. So that's kind of the push and the pull when it comes to these fees and where they're heading in regards to municipal taxes.
And I know historically we've had on the highway user revenues.
That's exactly right.
You know, for a period of time they were withheld, and now they're back, I think, flowing through to the municipalities. So the session also talked sort of about not leaving any Marylander behind. And there was, the governor had a very effective idea about a blueprint for Marylanders' future. Can you talk a little bit about what the legislature did in sort of backing that initiative of Governor Moore?
Well, let's take a step back just as we introduce Governor Moore to the audience here, because this has been an incredible breath of fresh air. It's my first time with a Democratic governor in 8 years, and it's very different than the prior administration. I liked personally the previous governor, but the way he interacted with the legislature was combative, and that added challenge when we were trying to legislate in a way that our voters wanted us to legislate. And so having Governor Moore there and this leave no one behind philosophy has really made our jobs so much easier, because he's supporting the work that we're doing, whether it's abortion rights or guns or cannabis, or like you mentioned, the blueprint for Maryland's future. So the idea behind this blueprint came actually before Governor Moore was elected, but because of this combativeness, we weren't able to fully implement it. It's a generational education reform package. It dramatically increases the investment in our public schools. I have 3 children in MCPS. I went to MCPS schools, and so it's very exciting. It also demands accountability, because we've seen in the past that funding our schools without demanding accountability in return is just essentially money down the drain. And so it has an incredible balance between putting the money where it needs to go, including here in MCPS, especially for schools that are Title I schools in real need of resources, and also ensuring that folks are accountable for how they use that money and that they're producing results for our children.
And in the case of the county schools, I know I want to go back to this after our break, but there was substantial funding for a couple new schools, correct, that came through, and I know the District 18 delegation worked hard on that. There was also, Jeff, I think 81 million that was targeted sort of mental health investments. Can you just describe where that money would go and how it would impact the mental health of Marylanders?
Yeah, well, this blueprint document is a living document. When we started, it was really about academic success and English language learners. But what we realized coming out of the pandemic is that we have this mental health crisis in children. And for some it's very serious. For some it is less serious, less noticeable. I see some of that in my own children. But this pandemic impacted kids in a way that will affect the rest of their lives. And that impact is not even something that is even knowable of how it will make the world look 40 years from now. What we do know is that right now kids are hurting, and we can provide the resources to help ameliorate those mental health issues. So here's where the money goes. It goes primarily to having mental health professionals in our schools, increasing funding for school psychologists, school counselors, and other school-based mental health professionals. And that's really important. My older kids are in middle school, which is really among the toughest years in school. And their counselors services hundreds and hundreds of kids. There's no way, even the best counselors can't know my kid on an individual basis. And so providing additional school-based mental health professionals who can really meet children where they are is critical in a post-pandemic era.
Right. Well, Jeff, I think that's very important. It's great that that extra money came through the session, devoted to it. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. This is David Winstead in the program In the Know. We have Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, and we'll be back in a moment.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection.
Want to get out of here?
To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out
Let's go!
and help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
Welcome back to the program In the Know. I'm David Winstead, and we're very pleased to have Maryland Senator Jeff Waldstreicher with us, and he's done a great job in the legislative session of 2023 for us. Jeff, continuing our discussion, I know that the District 18 delegation, the whole Montgomery County delegation, works very hard for Montgomery County, and both the legislative initiatives we talked about earlier, as well as looking at where there's state funds that match county needs. And one of them that I there are a bunch of them that came to the county, some on the transportation side, some on the school side. One that I found particularly interesting was for a long period of time, I worked with the county executive, who was on the council to advance a concept that's very cost effective called bus rapid transit. And it basically allows for additional surface transit connections and has much more minimal costs for construction than a light rail or subway, and it utilizes dedicated right-of-way in the middle of the road, essentially. Delegation got $6 million, I think, for the BRT. Can you talk about that and other sort of transportation related? I know some in North Bethesda.
That's right.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear what was brought home in that regard.
Yeah, bus rapid transit is an incredible tool for moving people quickly through our community. And the proof of concept has been on Route 29, Colesville Road, where what is called the Flash bus rapid transit has taken hold. And under the Ike Leggett administration, now Mark Elrich administration, that has clearly proved that bus rapid transit can work in our community. That's actually outside my legislative district, so I'm really excited to bring home this extra money to expand bus rapid transit into my legislative district along Veers Mill Road.
Right.
We know that unfortunately still there's a divide in Montgomery County between where the jobs are and where the people live. And a lot of folks are going east to west. They're going from the eastern portion of our county in Silver Spring and Wheaton west towards Rockville and Bethesda. And Veers Mill Road is a crucial corridor for moving east to west.
And congested.
To our job. And very congested, no question.
Yeah.
So next stop for bus rapid transit is Veers Mill Road in my legislative district. So I'm very excited to work with the county to make that happen.
That's great. You know, it goes back a few years, but when I was doing some work on 355 North in the White Flint area, I had heard that from the head of NIH campus, a guy that really manages the NIH presence in Montgomery County, so he's got a fairly important role. He talked about the link, I mean, Veers Mill being one, but also the purple line link that it would have, and once it's open and bringing employees to NIH. He was saying a lot of NIH employees live in East County, so you have a combination of obviously BRT and then 355 BRT, but you also have the purple line that will make it easier for employees to get from the east side of the county to NIH and the FDA and other campuses. So that's very good as well. What's your sense? I know the state supports a lot of the efforts of making sure that the employment base of NIH and FDA stays in Montgomery County and grows. What's your sense of the importance of those federal agencies to not only employment, obviously the health mission of the country? What have you done in recent years that kind of has reflected efforts to keep them happy in the county?
Yeah, so I think the federal government obviously is core to who we are as a region and who we are as a county. So I am the son of two federal government workers and was raised on their middle income salaries. My wife works for the federal government, and so I know personally how important the federal government is as an employer in our region. And we have to make sure that their continued growth is something that we can allow here in Montgomery County. So as you know, NIH is continuing to build, and part of our obligation as both a state and a county is to support the private employers that grow around our federal government. So of course near NIH are an incredible amount of private drug makers as well as near FDA.
Right.
And so making sure our county government and our state government is welcoming to those private businesses so that they can grow and thrive here is just as critical as keeping our federal government happy and based here in Montgomery County.
Right. You, also another small amount of money went to sort of that North Bethesda second entrance for the metro.
That's
and,
right.
I know that the county executive, I'm sure he's worked closely with the delegation, has this vision to sort of between supercomputer and healthcare to sort of potentially make the White Flint area, North Bethesda area, sort of an initial spot that new initiatives like the Biden announced a couple of years ago that he's moving forward with an advanced research project in health. And I happen knowing that side of the county pretty well and some of the landowners along that corridor, I think that's the site for this. I mean, in addition to what the exec's trying to do in bringing down the University of Maryland and creating a research hub there, I think that if the funding for this ARPA-H continues, it's the perfect site for that. What are your thoughts on that?
That's exactly right. So as you know, the whole White Flint area is ripe for development. And so it's got to be a public-private partnership. So our friends, the learners who own much of the land over there, as well as other landowners, are ready and excited to welcome private industry and welcome some of our cutting-edge government agencies and academic institutions. So a lot of folks, as you know, are now using ChatGPT in their daily life, essentially AI to kind of do mundane tasks. The same technology that powers AI, including supercomputing, can be used to invent new drugs and tailored drugs that would be meant just for your body or just for my body. This is an incredible technology, an incredible future, and we're just at the beginning of that. But the places that are doing this research need a home, need a hub where they can all support each other's work and have the private funding supporting them financially. And that hub is going to be North Bethesda, what we used to call White Flint.
I agree. And if it replicates the federal government's, they have one on defense, ARPA Defense, it does research, coordinates research in the defense area. It's a substantial presence. I've heard it's, 500,000 square feet kind of facility potentially. And
That's
NIH is key in guiding that, I think, their people.
And let me give you a couple names that don't get television time very often, because the county executive rightly gets a lot of credit for this, and of course the governor as well. But we've got two people in county government who are working on this a lot. And one is Tom Lewis, who used to be chief of staff in Annapolis, and one is Jake Weissman, another former chief of staff in Annapolis. And they are working day in and day out to bring these resources to North Bethesda and build on the county executive and governor's vision for what this area can be. It's very exciting. It won't happen tomorrow, but over the next few years, you're going to see some amazing things happen in White Flint.
And you take that and the cybersecurity strength at Fort Meade. It's a wonderful opportunity for Maryland, I think, going
That's
forward.
Right. And to be honest, the governor is leveraging these things to better market our state, because I do think our state is business friendly. Are there policies that we need to change to make it more business friendly? Absolutely. But I think reputationally, sometimes people think of Maryland as not as friendly. And part of what the governor is doing is not only changing the regulations and the laws, but also marketing our state to make clear what assets we have. And Maryland has a tremendous amount of assets. Right.
And speaking of assets, obviously our environment here in Maryland with the Bay for, the history of Maryland has always been very protected, and a lot of initiatives in ensuring that the pollutions in the Bay are minimized. I know this session, the delegation looked at the environmental initiatives, one of which was related to preserving the forestation in the county. Chevy Chase Village, we on the board there take great pride in our tree, the mature tree program, the canopy trees, and protecting them. It's a large part. Fortunately, we're an older community, so we have more mature, higher trees, and we take great pride in trying to keep them and making sure, that even if a tree does come down by permit on the housing side, you are replanting a replacement. So what happened in that regard? And there's a link that I wanted to make between protecting the forestry, but also being cognizant of the need for housing, because the MBIA that I've had a little involvement with, Maryland building industry, the home builders, it's a tough business, right? We need affordable housing, and so things like mitigation of forest and trees is a part of the cost of providing a house. So your thoughts on what you all accomplished, but also making sure that we're not inhibiting developers and home builders from building more affordable housing.
Well, I think that's right. I think everyone's on the same page. We built a really large table this year when it came to environmental protection to make sure home builders and industry are all at that table. You mentioned I've been in Annapolis a while, and I've seen more contentious relationships between industry and environmentalists. I think that's changing. Well, I know that it's changing because we're starting to see the impact of climate change on our daily lives. And private industry has gotten more active in being at the table when environmental regulations are happening and actually supporting so many of these important laws and regulations so that everything can happen all at once, so that we can continue building homes and expanding the number of people who live here in Maryland and providing affordable housing, that we continue growing our business climate while at the same time protecting our environment. Because I think businesses increasingly realize that climate change is a severe cost to them. It's a cost either in actual damage to their business or in the insurance costs that they pay to insure against some of this environmental damage. Right. And so everyone's at the table, and the Moore administration has really been wonderful in making that happen.
Oh, that's great. So the new head and new CEO of MML, Maryland Municipal League, was a former realtor, and I asked her her question not too long ago. And I think MML is going to play a part in this. I think they're looking at cases of how do you, as communities, municipalities, provide more housing? How do you balance the best case approach? Obviously, interest rates are a problem. You know, over the last year and a half, just interest rates going up. But I know it's an initiative of MML as well, is to look at this issue going forward. And I think there's even some summer study that's being done in that regard. Let me ask you two final questions. One is on the economic development side of the ledger. The building industry came out with a report not too long ago, about 3 months ago, really talking about some of the cost of doing business here in Montgomery County. And you know, you seem to be very cognizant of that. You're a sole practitioner.
Sure.
You know how to create a business and to provide clients value and revenue. But how do we accomplish all the things that the delegation is looking to accomplish, but still keep in mind the cost of doing business and trying to make Maryland more competitive for business?
So I think part of it is starting with the assets that we have, that we've talked about here, about why starting a business or keeping a business here is advantageous to the businesses themselves, because there's so much going on in Maryland that's just incredible, and businesses want to be part of that. Part of this is our municipalities and our county need to look at permitting reform. A lot of the complaints I hear about what people refer to as the cost of doing business is actually not the cost itself, it's the bureaucratic process of obtaining permits and building physical infrastructure. And we need to make sure that we can speed that process along in a way that feels fair to our local businesses. So I had someone who came to me and they had a permitting officer who came out to the site and gave the green light, and they were excited because they were going to build new affordable housing in our community for people who really needed affordable housing. And then a different permitting officer came out for some different reason and overruled the first permitting officer on something related to the permit. And the idea that you could have this kind of bureaucratic morass for someone who's trying to do the right thing and build affordable housing, I think it can be troublesome. And so, so yes, we have to look at costs, and obviously, you know, the total economic costs of doing business in Maryland must be something that we review and constantly monitor. But the speed at which businesses can grow through, if they need permits, has to be the big part of that. Exactly.
Jeff, thank you for taking your time to come here to the In the Know program. We've had the pleasure the last half an hour of talking to Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, and we appreciate him coming and hope again that you'll visit us next year at the end of the session.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And that's the In the Know program. Thank you very much for joining.